Hello, everyone, and welcome to our RTAP bi-monthly webinar series. And thank you for joining us for today's presentation, Navigating Grant Writing and Management with Thrive Allen County. My name is Peyton, and I'm a GRA here at KUTC RTAP. And please feel free to add your names and agencies in the chat box so we can all get acquainted. And in the meantime, I'll just go over some housekeeping rules before introducing the speaker. Please remember to keep yourself muted during the duration of the presentation, as there will be a Q&A session at the end. But if you do have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat box so we can address them later on. I will also be adding my email to the chat box in case you run into technical difficulties, and feel free to reach out to me with any other concerns as well. I also want to remind everyone that we cater these webinars towards you all, so if there's any topics you want to hear, please feel free to email us with suggestions. And today's speaker is Jessica Thompson. Jessica Thompson is the Deputy Director of Thrive Allen County and currently oversees all the fundraising initiatives at Thrive, including grant writing and management, individual giving, and major donors. Grant funding is important and necessary for the success of rural transit providers, but applying for grants can be a long and arduous process. In this webinar, Jessica Thompson provides her expertise on navigating the grant process, from identifying grant opportunities to grant writing. Jessica Thompson will share her tips and tricks to make sure the process is more manageable for rural transit providers. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen. And we will get started. So thank you, everyone, for coming today. I was just saying, I'm not real good at preparing like written down speeches for these presentations. I speak more off the cuff. So if I ramble a little bit, I apologize in advance. And I hope to share some of my ideas with you about and best practices about what I do and how I do it, and hopefully give you guys some ideas. So, as Peyton said, I am the current Deputy Director at Thrive Allen County. I've been doing grant writing for over 15 years. I started as a executive director for a small camp and retreat center. And during the summer, as you know, with summer camps, there are a multitude of staff. But during the rest of the year, there's just me, maybe one other person. And so I had to learn really quick, if I wanted extra funding for my camps, I had to write for them. And I couldn't really depend on anybody else to do that. So that's how I kind of got started with grant writing, and it snowballed from there. Since I've been with Thrive Allen County in 2019, I've brought in over $20 million to both Thrive Allen County and other Allen County entities. We believe in a tide lifts all ships. And so we provide free grant writing services to Allen County entities, both governmental entities and nonprofit entities that can't afford a grant writer of their own. And in the last 4 years, we've brought in about $10 million just to those other entities. I have experience in arts and humanities, health and wellness, transportation, housing, environment, and more. So I have a lot of experience in a lot of different things. I'm kind of a jack of all trades when it comes to grant writing. So what is a grant? You know about 53 and 5311s, so you know a little bit about grants. A grant is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for nonprofits, for-profits, government agencies to obtain funding that they need in order to reach their goals, in order to make measurable impact on the audience that they serve. It's a gift that an individual or a company or a foundation gives that you do not need to pay back. But please remember, it is not free money. There are always stipulations to grants. There are reports that need to be written. There are goals that need to be met. There are things that need to happen that make it not be free money. And so a lot of people think of it as free money, and it's not. I get asked all the time, as soon as somebody hears that I'm a grant writer, oh, could you write a grant for me? I have a new business and I need grant money, or I want to start a nonprofit and I need grant money, or I need a new roof. Can you write a grant for that? Opportunities are not endless. There's not a grant for everything out there. You have to be strategic. You have to find the ones that are the right fit and embrace those, and realize that whatever you write, it's going to be a lot of hard work, both writing of the grant and the administration of the grant. It is not, you get the money and then you're good to go. There's a lot of work that's involved in grants and grant management. So the different types of grants that we have, the first one is we have foundation grants, which are typically private entities with private money that they can give out for specific causes. The next one we have is government grants. Those are local, state, and federal money that are given out for the betterment of communities, typically. And then there's donor advised funds, which some of you may or may not have heard about. This is typically private money that's distributed by a community foundation or other public charity. So donors will contribute to a donor advised fund, and then the community foundation will distribute those funds. Within each of those three, there are 4 different types that you could go for. There are competitive grants, which are based on the merit of your proposed project. So they come out and say, we want to fund diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives for projects in Kansas. And we are giving out $1 million for this. And then you have to write a grant based off of that, asking for money, and you are competing against other organizations for that money. Formula grants are typically grants that are predetermined. So Head Start is a good example of this. They are a formula grant. They already know that they're going to get that grant. They still have to do the application. They still have to submit all the forms, but they know that if those happen, if those get submitted, that they are more than likely going to get those awards. And so they can count on that money. Continuation grants are usually renewal grants of an existing grant already. We have a grant right now at Thrive called the CMS Navigator Grant. It's a continuation grant. It's a 3-year grant that we have to reapply for every year, even though we've been given it for 3 years. And so that's a continuation grant. And then the last one is a pass-through grant. And this is usually issued by one entity to be distributed to sub-awardees. 5010 and 5311 are really good examples of pass-through grants. They are originally distributed by the federal government to the state government, who then award it to transportation organizations. So here are some common grant terms that you may or may not know about. An RFP A NOFO and an FOA are essentially the same thing. Are the proposal that the foundation or the government entity has released talking about the grants that they want to fund. An LOI is typically called a letter of intent, and it usually means that they want you to write a shorter version of your grant to submit for pre-approval to the foundation or the governmental entity before you submit a full proposal. Letters of intent usually are used to filter out entities that the foundation or the governmental entities don't feel are really fit into what they want to fund. An AOR you will see on government grants a lot. It's authorized organization representative. It's basically the person who is authorized to sign contracts on your behalf. You don't want, if you're the one writing the grant, but you don't have the authority to sign contracts for your organization, you do not want to be the AOR. You want to assign the executive director, the president, CEO, the director of transportation, whoever has that authority, you want that person to be the AOR. The 990 is a form that is required by all nonprofits to be completed by the IRS as part of their requirements to remain a 501c3. I bring this one up because a lot of foundations require you to submit 990s as proof of your financial stability and that you are a nonprofit. A single audit is an audit conducted by an independent accountant on federal grants when you receive more than $750,000 total from the federal government. So if you have 5 different grants and they equal $1 million total, you have to complete a single audit in addition to completing a regular audit. A UEI is a unique entity identifier. It is required for all federal grants and typically for state grants as well. You have to have a UEI before you can apply for grants through grants.gov. A logic model is typically a visual aid that's designed to display program designs for stakeholders. It'll ask questions like, what resources are you using? What outcomes do you expect to have? What outputs do you expect to have? What resources do you need in order to make this happen? And then a MOU is a memorandum of understanding, and that's typically an agreement between 2 entities for a grant. If you are partnering with another entity on a grant and they are doing part of the work and you are doing part of the work, it is always advisable to have a memorandum of understanding so that way everybody is on the same page for what they need and how they need it and what's expected of them. So what to know before you begin? First off, know the funding priorities of the funder. You want to make sure that the priorities that the funder has align with your mission or your specific project. It doesn't do any good to apply to an entity that funds only art projects, art and humanity projects, and you're a transportation organization. You are not going to get that funding, no matter how well-crafted your grant is. And so you need to make sure that the priorities of the funder align with your mission and your specific project. You also need to look at the funding requirements. A lot of grants have specific geographic locations that they fund. They fund specific types of organizations. Some will fund 501c3s only. Some will fund 501c3s and governmental entities. Some will fund, for-profits. Some will do just scholarships. So you need to look at those funding requirements and see what they are. And feel free to reach out if there's questions about it. I reached out just recently to an organization, to a funder, about potentially applying for one of their grants because they said that they funded Kansas. And then come to find out that even though their website says Kansas, what they really fund is Sedgwick County, Clark County in Kansas. And so I dropped that grant because there was no point in me trying to apply for a grant that was more than likely going to be rejected because of the geographic location. The other thing you need to really look at is the application process. Applications are very similar once you start writing grants on a regular basis. They ask for a lot of the same information, but they ask for it in different ways. They ask different questions than what you may be used to. And so you have to decipher what they're really wanting. You have to, really figure out what the application process is for that grant maker and what they are requesting, and provide what they're requesting, not what you want to provide. The other really good thing to do before you begin is to look at how much they have funded in the past and who they funded in the past. And you can get this information from the 990. Foundations are required to submit 990s as well. And in those 990s are a list of everybody they fund and how much they fund. And so you can look at that list and see how much to ask for, who do they typically, give requests to, what cities are they typically funding in? Is there a way for you to talk to them about, if they're not funding much in your area, if they would? And so those are all questions to ask as you're looking at the grant history of the funder. The other thing that you really need is to have your project figured out. You really need to have a clear outline, and this is where a logic model comes in really handy, because you have to lay out what the resources are, what the outputs, what the outcomes are, what all the things are that you're going to need to write in your grant. It's all in a visual form that you can go to and look at and make sure that you include in your narrative. So you need to make sure that you know exactly what you're going to request before you start writing your proposal and how you're going to request it. The other thing that's a really good idea is to already have your project budget in place. This can be adjusted based off of how much the funder is funding for that particular project. But it's good to have a general project budget in place before you start writing the grant. That way you have researched accurate pricing, you know how much things cost, you know how much salaries are going to be. And then if you write, like say $100,000 budget, but they're only funding for $50,000, you can adjust that budget to meet that $50,000, but you still have an idea of what needs to be funded still out of that $50,000 and what you're going to prioritize. Lastly, make sure that you write really clearly and keep it concise. Avoid jargon at all costs. You need to assume that the people who are reading these grants have no clue what a transportation program and what it entails, because they probably don't. these are a lot of times volunteers who are doing this, or it's people who are working for the foundation that are reading. And so they a lot of times don't know the ins and outs of programs or of art programs or marketing initiatives. All they know is a general idea of what you're wanting. And so you have to assume that they need more information than what you would typically give to somebody who is also in the transportation program. So these elements of a grant, you'll hear people talk a lot about a narrative, but within the narrative, there's a lot that goes into it. So first off is the organizational history typically. And this is something that you can put together before you start writing your grants, and you can use over and over again. Your organizational history is typically not going to change a lot. And so you'll be able to put that together and keep it for grants. The program outline is another thing that you can prepare ahead of time and use for multiple grants, especially if you're funding for a specific program and you're not really deviating from that. You can put together that program outline, tweak it a little bit for each individual grant that is being asked, or what's being asked in each individual grant, and then really have a good, thorough program outline in place. Another thing that's typically asked that you can prepare ahead of time is the target population description. So they want to know, what is your demographic? Like, what is the makeup of county, of the people that you serve, of the town that you live in? What are the demographics? But more than the demographics, what are things that they need to know about your target population that aren't just statistics? A lot of times, especially when I write about transportation, I write about Allen County being very rurally isolated, being more than 2 hours from any metro area, making it very difficult for people to get to doctor's appointments and to safety net appointments, and even sometimes to jobs. And so I make sure to include that in my target population description. Goals and outcomes and timeline, that's going to differ for each grant. And so it's going to be, you can put general goals and general outcomes that you want to accomplish, and keep those around, but those are really going to be individualized for each grant. And they're going to ask different questions about that. And then the sustainability plan for the grant is another one that you can really put together beforehand. And that is, what are you going to do when these grant funds run out? What are you going to do when you don't have this money coming in? How are you going to sustain the program? And so that's something that you can put together ahead of time as well, and really figure out, how are we going to sustain this program long term? The other things that grantors usually look for is a budget and then a budget narrative. So a budget and a budget narrative are two different things. A budget is purely the numbers. It's usually a spreadsheet. It's usually just, like, this is how much we need in salaries. These are the specific people that are going to be funded in for salaries. These are the types of I need marketing money. I need mileage, type of thing. Budget narrative explains why you need that money. So I need 15% of the project director's time because they're the ones who are going to be submitting the reports. And their salary is this amount, and they are going to be paying 15% of their time, and this is what that equals to. Or I have, FICA, and I have an individual retirement account, and I have health insurance that I have to pay for in benefits. And this is the breakdown of each of those. Or I need to buy a new laptop for the new person that we're hiring for this initiative that we're getting ready to put together, because they're the ones who are going to be in charge of doing reports, or they're going to be the ones that are dispatching, whatever that may look like. The budget narrative explains why you need that money. And then finally, attachments. Foundations almost always ask for attachments. They usually ask for financials. They usually ask for your most recent audit, your most recent 990. They'll usually ask for your board of directors. They'll usually ask for proof of status, which is basically your IRS letter stating that you're a 501c3, or whatever that proof of status looks like for a governmental entity. Sometimes they'll ask for bylaws. It really just depends on what they need. So those are what are typically asked for in a grant proposal. So some application tips. First off, allow for plenty of time to prepare for a grant. It can take 25 to 40 hours to prepare a mid-size grant. And when I talk mid-size, I'm thinking between $50,000 and $250,000. Those are typically mid-size grants. And it can take 25 to 40 hours to put that together if you want a good quality grant. You need to make sure that you read the application package in its entirety. Read it, highlight it, read it again, highlight it again, like memorize as much as you can on that thing. It's going to be your Bible for that particular grant. It's going to tell you everything that you need to know in there. It's going to tell you, sometimes it'll even go down to like what the margins have to be for your pages, or what font you have to use, or how many pages you have to write it. It's going to tell you all the elements of the narrative that you have to include. Sometimes it'll include like even what you're going to be judged on for your grant application. So make sure to read that in its entirety multiple times. Don't be afraid to contact the program officer if you have questions. The program officer is the key program contact responsible for that grant. They answer inquiries. They oversee all aspects of that grant, typically from the grant application to the grant award to the grant management. So they are your go-to person, and they are usually in the application package somewhere. If not, look on websites for the foundations and see who you can contact about your grant. Once again, write in plain English and avoid jargon at all costs. You want to make sure that people are understanding what you are needing and why you are needing it. And you don't want to put unnecessary words in there or jargon that is going to confuse them. This one's really important. So know the specific deadline date and time that a grant is due. A lot of times, especially federal grants, they'll say it's due on August 28th at 4 p.m. Eastern time. or 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. And so you have to look at that and see what time those grants are due. States do it too. A lot of times, especially in Kansas, they have times, typically 4 p.m. Central is when they're due, because that's the end of the business day. I have foundations who have times due at noon and times due 11:59 p.m. and times all in between. So make sure that you look not for not just the date, but also for the time. And if they don't give a time, turn it in before that due date to make sure that you have it in a timely manner. That would be my recommendation. Don't wait until the last minute to turn in a grant. You will always run into problems. You will find out that your computer's not working, or the internet's down, or the pages that you thought you had copied are only copied every other page. I've had all these issues happen to me. It's you want to make sure that you turn in your grant application before the due date, so that way if there is something that is wrong, you can go back and fix it if you're allowed to. And also keeping in mind, especially with state and federal grants, if it's not in at that 11:59 p.m. Eastern time or that 4 p.m. Central time, and you're a minute over, they're probably not, the federal grant definitely will not accept it. State grants typically will not accept it. And that's because they have so many grants coming in to begin with. They have to filter out people who can't follow basic rules. So make sure to submit your application beforehand. I would always have a fresh pair of eyes read your proposal before you submit it. I do this. I always have somebody look over my grant before I submit it. I typically have two people do it. One who has no clue about the program, and then one who is one of my other grant writers who is really good at English, at grammar, at finding the technical issues. But you also want somebody who doesn't really have a clue about your project, because they can pick up on things that may not be as clear as you thought that they were. So it's always a good idea to have multiple eyes on your proposal before you submit it. And then lastly, make sure that you have all the required forms, that you have all the signatures that you need, that everything is submitted that has been requested. Because if you are missing something, your grant proposal will not go through. We recently had a grant proposal that we spent 25 to 40 hours on. Like I said, we submitted it and didn't catch the fact that we had to put in a public notice as part of our requirements for the grant, and we were automatically rejected for that grant, regardless of how well that was written. So make sure, once again, that you read that package in its entirety, and then that you also have all the required forms that you need in order to submit that grant. So some common mistakes that happen is failing to allow enough time to submit via mail or electronically. Most grants are electronic nowadays, but there are some that are still mailed. And you have to make sure that that'll be in the application package, and you have to make sure that you meet that. If they want it mailed, you have to mail it. And you have to allow enough time, especially with today's postal system, to allow that to get to them. Electronically, you're cutting it real close if the grant is due at 11:59 and you're submitting at 11:57. electronically, because it could take multiple minutes in order for that to process and be submitted and get to the portal that it needs to get to. So make sure that you have enough time for both of those. Another common mistake is not reading the application package in its entirety. It will get you every time. I guarantee you'll miss something that you'll catch after you submit the grant, and then worry the entire time that your grant is not going to be accepted because you missed one thing. Not following the formatting guidelines. This is more typical of federal and state grants, but foundations also have formatting guidelines that they will put into the application package sometimes. This is, like I said, everything from the type of font you use to the margins to the number of pages, and you have to make sure you follow those. I know a grant that was submitted to the feds that got rejected because they used the wrong margins. So they do look at those things. Not obtaining the required signatures on required forms, failing to proofread, and then using jargon, shorthand, and complicated words and phrases that only a few people understand. So these are some resources that provide additional training for grant writing, grant management, and then also some resources for grant research. Instrumental is one, Candid is one, and GrantStation is one for grant research. And these will help you find grants to use or to apply for. And they will also a lot of times give you information about the funder, give you how much they typically give, that they'll help do that research for you, so you don't have to go to the 990. Although I would still say it's a good idea to go to the 990, because they look at the average giving, and that could not be what their typical giving is. A good example of this is a foundation that we are currently applying for. I went on Instrumental and it said that their average giving was about $5,000. Well, when you look at their 990, the reason why that is because they give out about 200 scholarships that are $2,000 each. And then they give their grants that are typically $50,000 to $100,000 each. But had I just gone off of what Instrumental said, I would have only asked for $5,000 from them as opposed to $50,000 to $100,000. So it's a good idea to look at both. But they will give you ideas on grants that are coming up. They'll give you information on those grants, contact information, all sorts of stuff that is useful for you. And then, like I said, resources for grant writing. They include the Grant Professionals Association, the National Grants Management Association, and then the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Are there any questions? I know it was a lot of information, but grants are a lot of information, unfortunately. Oh, Peyton, you're muted.
Thank you. No, that was great. Thank you so much. I do have a question if people don't have questions already, but if someone was interested in working with you or any of the other services Thrive has to offer, how should they go about getting in touch?
So they can contact me I'm going to put it in the chat. It's jessica@thriveallencounty.org. And I can talk to you about what types of services we provide, and if you need help with grant writing, how much those services cost, and if we have enough space to, incorporate another grant for that. So,
Perfect, thank you.
yep.
Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, then I just want to remind everyone that this recording will be posted on YouTube. I did put the link for our website in the chat box, and you can just check that out in a few weeks and it should be up. Thank you so much, Jessica, for this presentation. It was amazing. And I know a lot of people had been asking about grant writing, so I'm sure this answered a lot of their questions.
Awesome. I'm glad I could be of help.
Okay, thank you all. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.